You aren't sitting ringside. You aren't even in a sold-out arena. Instead, you're packed in a movie theater in the suburbs. Or maybe you're leaning against a sticky bar rail in a local pub, staring up at a massive, closed-circuit projection screen. The air is heavy. It's that unmistakable mid-'80s blend of stale cigarette smoke, the vinegar sting of buffalo wings, and the smell of cheap beer. It's the smell of a Sunday afternoon where nobody is looking at the clock. For the last 6 months, your world has been curated by MTV. You've watched Cyndi Lauper scream herself hoarse at Captain Lou Albano. You've seen Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, the two biggest icons of the decade, invade Saturday Night Live just to tell you that the training starts now. But behind the neon and the hype, there was a shadow. Vince McMahon had pushed all his chips to the center of the table. His bank account, the survival of the WWF, and the very concept of sports entertainment was riding on one satellite feed beaming out of Madison Square Garden. If that screen went black, the dream was over. But it didn't go black, it exploded. I'm Moonlight Peterson, and today we're stepping into the vault to revisit the afternoon the cultural landscape shifted forever. This is the gamble, the celebrities, and the beautiful chaos of WrestleMania 1. In 1985, wrestling wasn't a global juggernaut. It was a map of scattered kingdoms. It was a territory business, gritty, regional, and fiercely guarded. If you lived in Dallas or Fort Worth, Texas, you were living and dying with the Von Erichs at the Sportatorium. In the Mid-Atlantic, you were watching Ric Flair and Magnum TA redefine cool in 60-minute Broadway matches. From the legendary Barns of Memphis to the frozen Hart House in Calgary, the recipe was the same. Low production, zero fireworks, and no fancy entrance themes. Just a ring, a microphone, and a crowd that would happily throw trash at the heels and start a riot if their hero didn't get the win. But while the rest of the world was looking at the dirt on the canvas, Vince McMahon was looking at the neon lights of Manhattan. He saw a vision that involved flashy music, high-end production, and the one thing wrestling lacked, Hollywood. He called it the Rock and Wrestling Connection. He didn't just want the wrestling fans who had been following Harley race for 20 years. He wanted the kids who were glued to MTV. Back then, MTV was the literal center of the universe, a 24-hour stream of Cyndi Lauper, Michael Jackson, and Madonna. Vince realized that if he could get Cyndi Lauper to walk Hulk Hogan to the ring, he wasn't just selling a wrestling match anymore, he was selling a pop culture event. And let's talk about the name WrestleMania. It has a certain ring to it, right? Well, it almost didn't exist. Vince's original working title for the event was, and I'm not kidding, the Colossal Tussle. Can you imagine? We'd be talking about the legacy of Tusslemania today.
You serious, Clark?
Thank goodness for the legendary Howard the Fink Finkel, the voice of our childhood. He's the one who pitched the name that became a brand. But here's the reality you didn't see on the posters. Heading into that Sunday, Vince McMahon was standing on a razor's edge. He had leveraged everything. We're talking a third mortgage on his home and every cent of capital the WWF had. He had pushed all his chips to the center of the table. There was no plan B. There was no, well, we'll try again next year. Success was the only option to keep the dream alive. And the scariest part? It wasn't even in his hands. He was relying on 1980s satellite technology, which was notoriously shaky and prone to blacking out. If those feeds failed in the movie theaters and armories across the country, the WWF was facing a certain and public death. It was WrestleMania or bankruptcy, period. By today's standards, the show was lean. There were no 7-hour pre-shows or multi-night marathons. It was one Sunday afternoon, 9 matches, 2 hours of pure, uncut adrenaline packed into the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, right in the beating heart of New York City. The curtain raiser that afternoon featured a massive crowd favorite and former Intercontinental Champion Tito Santana squaring off against the Executioner. If you were a kid in the 80s, Tito was the hero you wanted. He was fast, he was technical, and he had that Arriba energy. The match was quick, ending when Santana slapped on the figure 4 leg lock, forcing the submission. In that moment, Tito didn't just win a match, he entered the history books as the answer to the ultimate trivia question. Who was the first person to ever win at WrestleMania? Next, we saw a mountain of human flesh, the master of the 5 count, King Kong Bundy, taking on SD Special Delivery Jones. Now look, Special Delivery lived up to his name that day, but not in the way he wanted. Bundy caught him, splashed him, and it was over before the crowd had even finished finding their seats. The legendary Howard Finkel grabbed the mic from the rafters of the Madison Square Garden and announced the official time as a total of 9 seconds. That announcement solidified Bundy as an absolute titan, the most dominant force in the ring. Now, if you look at your Swatch-watch today and check the tape, the time was actually closer to 23 seconds. But in '85, we didn't care about the math. Bundy was the scariest man on the planet, and in our minds, he had just ended a man's career in the blink of an eye. But the highlight that everyone was talking about at school the next day was the Body Slam Challenge. You had the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant, taking on another mountain of a man, Big John Studd. There was a whopping $15,000 in cash stuffed into a small duffel bag, a fortune in 1985, waiting for the man who could slam the other. The tension in the garden was thick enough to cut with a knife. When Andre finally locked his arms around Studd, hoisted all 360 pounds of him up, and slammed him into the canvas, the crowd nearly blew the roof off the building. It was a moment of pure raw power. But it was what happened after the slam that defined the era. Andre was handed that bag of cash, and instead of heading to the locker room to count his winnings, he reached in and started throwing stacks of $100 bills into the front row. The crowd went feral. A rattled Bobby the Brain Heenan, Studd's legendary manager, scrambled into the ring like a frantic pickpocket, snatched the bag from Andre's hands, and sprinted for the safety of the dark hallways. That was the moment the world knew. This wasn't just a sports competition. This was a spectacle. This was a circus. This was WrestleMania. Now let's get to the reason we all gathered around those grainy screens, the main event. It's a bizarre piece of history, but WrestleMania 1 is the only time in the event's 4-decade run that the WWF Championship wasn't on the line. But honestly, we didn't care. This wasn't just a match. It was a high-stakes tag team war that felt like an 80s action blockbuster on par with Terminator, Commando, and First Blood.
I'll be back.
In one corner, you had the face of the revolution, Hulk Hogan, teaming up with the mohawked, gold chain-wearing pitbull of the 80s, Mr. T. Across from them stood the ultimate villains, the sharp-tongued Rowdy Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. And if those names weren't big enough, the guest list was a literal who's who of pop culture. With Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse the Body Ventura calling the action on the mic, they welcomed a lineup that only the 80s could produce. Billy Martin, the legendary firebrand manager of the New York Yankees, stepped in as the guest ring announcer to give the match that Big Apple prestige. Liberace, the flamboyant king of Vegas himself, complete with the Rockettes and more sequins than a 1970s disco ball, performing a kickline right in the center of the ring. And then you had Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time. He was the outside referee, there specifically to keep an eye on any shenanigans Cowboy Bob Orton might have been planning for his buddies. The entrance alone was worth the price of admission. Piper led his team to the ring with the full Highland bagpipe treatment, walking through a wall of boos so loud the projection screens practically vibrated. And then, the moment the world had been waiting for. The first notes of Real American blasted through the Garden sound system. The crowd went nuclear. The atmosphere was pure electricity as Hogan and Mr. T, accompanied by Jimmy Superfly Snuka, marched to the ring. It wasn't a walk, it was a coronation. The match was a blur of chaos, but there's one moment that every fan remembers, when Muhammad Ali almost throws a legit right hand at Piper. If you pause the tape, you can see it. that split second of genuine respect and a healthy dose of fear in Hot Rod's eyes. Even the baddest man in wrestling didn't want a piece of Ali. The finish? Pure 80s mayhem. All four men were in the ring. The referee was losing control and Snick was being shoved out to the floor. Cowboy Bob Orton, sporting that famous permanent cast on his arm from the world's longest running injury, climbed to the top rope. Orndorff had Hogan locked in a full Nelson, wearing him down, turning him toward the corner for that final blow. Orton launched, but the Hulkster moved. That heavy plaster cast slammed into the back of Orndorff's head instead. Mr. Wonderful dropped like a sack of potatoes in the ring. Hogan didn't miss a beat. He covered him for the 1-2-3, sending Madison Square Garden into an absolute frenzy. A disgusted Piper and Orton didn't stay to celebrate. They didn't even help their fallen partner. Piper took one final swing at the official and vanished into the darkness of the tunnel. They had lost the match, but they had turned the heat up to a boiling point. Job well done. When the dust finally settled in Madison Square Garden, one thing was clear. WrestleMania 1 was a massive, undisputed hit. Over 1 million people had tuned in via closed-circuit television, paying a premium just to sit in a dark theater with strangers. That Sunday afternoon didn't just break records, it broke the old way of doing business. It was the proof of concept Vince McMahon needed. Sports entertainment wasn't just a buzzword anymore, it was the future of global media. Almost overnight, wrestling was no longer a subculture hidden in smoke-filled barns. It was mainstream. Suddenly, you couldn't walk into a Toys R Us or Kmart without seeing the Hulkster's face staring back at you. This was the era of the LJN action figure. If you were a kid in '85, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These weren't your standard jointed G.I. Joes. They were heavy, 8-inch slabs of solid rubber. They didn't have articulation, they had weight. If you took an LJN Andre the Giant to the head during a living room match, you're going to have a lump. And we loved them. They were indestructible, just like the heroes they represented. But the merchandising blitz didn't stop at the toy aisle. The WWF took over your entire life. There was the Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling Saturday morning cartoon. There were the puffy vinyl lunchboxes that smelled like bologna and juice boxes. There was the bed sheets where you'd dream of main eventing the garden while tucked under a polyester Hulk Hogan. From vitamins to ice cream bars with the wooden sticks, if there was a square inch of space for a logo, Vince put a wrestler on it. This was the long leash era of childhood, where we were fueled by sugar and Saturday morning promos. WrestleMania 1 was the catalyst that turned pro wrestlers into living, breathing superheroes. Vince took the grit of the territories and polished it into a multi-million-dollar machine that changed the way we played, the way we shopped, and the way we consumed pop culture. As we look toward the neon lights of Las Vegas for WrestleMania 42, it's almost impossible to reconcile what the event is now with what it was then. We've gone from the grainy closed-circuit feeds in local armories to a global multi-day spectacle that takes over entire cities. But it's worth remembering that the multi-billion-dollar empire we see today was built on a razor's edge. It started with one promoter, a third mortgage, and a handful of celebrities who were brave enough, or crazy enough, to step into the ring. Vince McMahon was one bad satellite feed away from losing it all. One technical glitch on that Sunday afternoon in 1985 could have rewritten the history of pop culture. But the feed held, the rock and wrestling connection surged, and for those of us watching, the world felt a little bigger, a little louder, and a lot more colorful. If you were one of the lucky ones sitting in that dark theater in 1985, or if you still have that old crumpled ticket stub from a wrestling card at your local arena tucked away in a shoebox somewhere, I want to hear about it. Find me on social media at Bite Size Nostalgia. Send me those photos of your LJN figures or that faded Hulk Hogan t-shirt you refuse to throw away. I'm Moonlight Peterson. Thanks for stepping into the vault and the ring with me today. Until next time, keep your memories close, the VCRs tracked, and remember, for us, it was never just a match. It was a frequency, and we're still dialed in.